Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. Welcome back to my permaculture garden here in Zone 8B in Portland, Oregon. I'm sitting down in the annual veggie bed. You can see a tomatillo here next to me, loads of bumblebees and other native bees in the garden right now, lots of longhorn bees and squash bees and hoverflies, as well as those species of Pacific Northwest bumbles. I am not a bombus expert, so don't ask me to tell you exactly what species are down here. Probably something I should learn more about. I'm trying to be really careful and not step on this little bumblebee who keeps feeding on flowers right down on the ground. So I thought, you know what, it's August 1st. By the time this video publishes, it'll be a couple of days into August. Let's take a couple of moments and talk about what is going well and what is not going so well in my permaculture garden this year. So I've been really busy. I feel like I'm always saying that, but I've been really busy trying to settle my parents' estate and also, get their house ready to sell, etc., etc. And so I have not spent as much time in the garden as I would like. I've also been really busy dealing with the fact that there's a community coalition that I'm part of that is trying to stop a diesel freight warehouse from coming in on our street. And that facility burnt almost to the ground. It burned really badly several days ago. And so dealing with that fallout and the future plans for the community has taken a lot of my time. One of the things that I talk about a lot on this channel, and I've talked about it other phases of my life where things were really hard and difficult, is that permaculture, as I'm sliding off this rock here, is that permaculture is by design a garden system where you should be able to walk away. You should be able to have periods of illness or injury and come back to your system and know that it is fairly well self-sustaining, and you might have to do a little bit of cleanup here and there. You might have to do some pruning. You might miss some of the annual veggies that need a higher level of attention than your perennials. But the basic framework of your garden should be able to sustain periods of neglect from the gardener. Well, I haven't been neglectful. I've been intentional about watering. I've not kept up on the pruning as well as I should have. And there's a squirrel fight happening over there. I don't know if you can hear it. And you might hear ducks and chickens feeding. I just fed them dinner. So there's parts of the garden that look like a little messier than normal, a little bit more unkempt, even though I like kind of a wild and unkempt look. But then there's also things that just aren't doing well on their own. Permaculture design does not equal a perfect Eden-like garden where you have no pest and disease pressure. The idea of a permaculture garden is that your pest and disease pressure is manageable and that it is not overwhelming, right? Some level of pests and diseases are normal and natural in a garden. What shouldn't be natural and shouldn't be accepted is complete and total crop loss, right? And sometimes things don't work well in our gardens because we're pushing the boundaries of what can do well in our climate. And so for me, I'm always experimenting, and I accept that some things may struggle and there may be pest and disease pressure because this is not an ideal location for them and they are stressed growing here. For example, I really love Chilean guavas. They don't do well here. I've lost them repeatedly when we've had periods of heavy snow and ice, probably partially my fault because I should wrap them in burlap for the winter, and I don't. I'm just a little bit too lazy. So, when I'm looking at what does and doesn't do well, I'm trying to not have judgment on myself. I'm trying to accept that life is really busy, it's really hectic. My best laid plans for what I will and won't take care of in the garden tend to not come to fruition in the way that I would hope. I tend to have other things that come into my life and prevent me from accomplishing everything I would like to do in the garden. And then there's the fact that we cannot foresee and predict all of the weather things that are going to happen in our garden. So we may or may not have weather patterns that we can expect, El Nino or La Nina years, but there are going to be heat events and cold events and rain or drought that sometimes we can't predict for. And there may be things like fires, there may be other events that put stress on our gardens in a way we don't imagine. And so I always plan for 20% crop loss in my garden. I overplant, I plan to share with the birds, I plan to share with the other wildlife in the garden, and I plan for redundancy. I plan for some things to struggle some years, but that's okay because other things will come and fill in the void. If everything produces at 100%, I have tons of extras to share with people. So for me, overplanting is never really a worry. Having too much of a diversity of crops is not something I worry about too much. I hope to cover in the future how I've narrowed down some of the quantity and diversity that I have in the garden. But for me in general, having a diversity is a bonus because it means that if something struggles, something else does really well. Again, that doesn't mean nothing struggles. So let's talk about that real quick. What is doing really well this year? It's a great tomato year. Sometimes in the Pacific Northwest, we don't have tomatoes the first week of August. I've been eating tomatoes for a week. Small slicers like Oregon Spring and Silettes are two of my favorite slicers, but I'm also getting my Sweet Million cherry tomatoes, my Sun Gold cherry tomatoes every day. I can enjoy cherry tomatoes. I like them with salt and balsamic vinegar for lunch, for dinner, for a late night snack. So it's a good year for tomatoes so far. I already picked some of these this morning. I'm avoiding the funnel web down here. I don't know if you can see her. Getting flies in the garden. Coming in here. Get some more cherry tomatoes to have with dinner. Sun Gold and the Sweet Millions. Right next to it, you can see my Costata Romanesco squash. Still producing great. I had to share a bunch with a friend because it's more than we can eat. It's also shaping up to be a good year for pumpkins. I am struggling with squash bugs, and I made a video about that. It seems that they are here to stay in Portland, in the Portland area for a lot of folks, and something that we may have to contend with every year. I have been really on top of squishing the eggs every other day in the garden, and that seems to be containing them. I have only seen 2 adults, and I've only seen babies once, and I killed all the babies. They were just hatching. And I'm merciless about it. So, other things that are doing really well. The rain garden is doing spectacularly well, and it is providing a feast for the eyes for me, the gardener, and also for our pollinators. Loads and loads of butterflies and wasps and hoverflies and bees in the rain garden this year. And I think that's because I have been adding more and more plants. So there is a more diverse buffet for them and blooms over a longer period of time that are more diverse. So really pleased with that. Things that look like they are shaping up to do really well are my grapes. I have a bajillion unripe grapes set. So I'm hoping, most of my grapes are late grapes, which won't be ready until September. I'm hoping it's gonna be a great year for grapes. Looks like it's also gonna be a good year for apples and quince, and a gangbuster year for pears. I have the biggest pear set on my suckle pear tree I have ever had. And I've had to go in and carefully thin so that I don't have broken branches. So things that are not doing as well so far. My sea berries have not set nearly as big of a crop as last year, and I'm not sure if that is because of the weather or whether it was, weather right when the pollinators needed to be out or some other factor. I actually didn't pay attention to the blooms, so sea berries not doing as well as normal. Other things that are not doing as well as normal, I have to think about that. Everything's doing really well. For me, my Rudder Beans are doing really poorly this year. I have basically none. I'll show you the arch behind me. I think that rodents and or squirrels and or crows, which often will dig up the germinating beans, got to most of them, and I didn't diligently replant in time. And so one of my cattle panel arches looks pretty sad because it was supposed to be covered in Rudder Beans and they're just not there. That's okay. I got quite a lot of bush beans for the freezer. One of the other things that is not doing as well this year is that we had a couple of chickens die, probably of old age, but also some of our chickens are a little bit older. We do have the younger chickens, but like Ruth will eat 5 eggs every day. So I haven't had as many eggs coming out of the garden, and I've had to buy eggs a few times. One of the ways that we've supplemented our protein to deal with less protein coming out of our garden is that we joined a local mushroom CSA. And that has meant once a week we have a delivery of fresh mushrooms. They may be oyster, they may be shiitake, they may be lion's mane or enoki, but I have a surprise delivery of unknown, oh hello, there is a bee very interested in the camera. A surprise delivery every week. That is something that I get to cook with. So that's one way we've added more protein to our stir fries and other dishes when we've had fewer eggs. I've also been able to, as I said in my recent video, purchase some milk and cheese from a local goat producer. So many bumblebees in the garden right now, you guys. As long as I am sitting here, I should say, I feel really safe sitting in the garden with bees everywhere. I mean, everywhere. They're not interested in me, they're interested in feeding. And as long as I don't squish or roll them, I'm not going to get stung. Bumblebees are very non-aggressive. Foraging bees in general are non-aggressive. Foraging honeybees don't have a hive to protect. They're trying to get their food. They're old ladies, the oldest ladies in the colony, and get back to the colony. I haven't found any other native bees that are aggressive. And at this time of year, none of the wasps are particularly aggressive either. In September, that'll be different. Yellow jackets will become more aggressive. So overall, a pretty good year, despite having, sadness in the community with the fire at the Kmart Prologis building, despite dealing with the stress of not being in the garden as much as I would like, because I am dealing with paperwork and my parents' estate. The garden is still really producing for me. I'm grateful for my neighbors that are understanding that I'm looking over at this hazelnut, that some of my trees are a little overgrown and I didn't get to all of my summer pruning this year. That's okay. I will catch up on it in the fall. I actually really love pruning in the fall and winter. It's a task I really enjoy. So this year, I'm pretty happy so far with how things are going. I would love to hear in the comments how your garden is doing. How are things going for you? Is anything kind of weird? Is anything struggling? Are you finding anything unusual? For me, I think my biggest things that are like I'm questioning why they're such a problem are the squash bugs, although I do think I imported them in last year from a squash plant purchased at a plant nursery. And then my sea buckthorn. I was really hoping for a big harvest of sea buckthorn, and she just didn't, neither of the she's, I have 2 females, they just didn't set very much fruit this year. But that's okay, because I think it's going to be a fantastic pear year, and quince years will have a lot of late fall fruit for the freezer. Also my persimmon way back here in the corner, my early fuyu is going to have tons of persimmons. I find for me, she produces really well every other year, and that may be because I don't prune her heavily enough to get a big crop every year, but it looks like I'm going to get a big persimmon crop this year as well. So thanks for listening to me ramble. This is my early August update. I will definitely have an update in early September, because you don't know what happens in the span of a month. In the Pacific Northwest, historically, the last few years, September has kind of turned into wildfire month, and that's really gummed up some of our plans. And on that note, I will say, if you have a permaculture garden, if you don't have a permaculture garden, if you have a traditional garden and you're interested in permaculture, thinking really intentionally about your design and having realistic expectations of your garden and your own ability to commit to maintenance of your garden, and how that interplay between the garden design needing less maintenance and your life and the amount that you can give in the garden, how those work together, I think is a really important key to having a successful permaculture garden. Having success that you can measure, and being not stressed by your garden, and being grateful and appreciative for the harvest that you do get, is all about setting appropriate expectations and realistic expectations about the fact that we only have so much control in the garden. We are a part of the garden ecosystem. We can help have a hand in designing it, but we do not control all of the factors. For me, that's really liberating and helps me enjoy the garden a lot more. So I'm gonna go get a few more chores done here. It was in the mid-90s today, and it's cooling off now, and it seems like a great time to get a little bit of chop and drop done. Thanks.